So the component has this life cycle. When you call a component and send property state, or just call it without any properties, the React life cycle would call this component, and before it gets to the DOM, it will go to the constructor and do anything you want to do with it. So initialize the state or do anything that happens once in the life cycle of this component, and then get derived state from props. I think this can happen inside the constructor as well. So we can read about this. You can get your own state from props. I haven't used this before, but let's take a look at it. Derived state from props. This is a new property. Okay. So it's a new thing in React 16.3, and as component will receive props gets removed, you need some means of updating the state based on the props change. The community decided to introduce new static method to handle this. Okay. So going back, so this is exactly this one, but it's interactive. So when you click on anything, you go to the
description.
Yeah, to the documentation of it. And these are the ones that are commonly used, and you need to know what they are. And then there are other ones that are not that common, and you could, like, I've never used this other one, but it was newly created, so yeah, it makes sense. So you could check this button and use other stuff that you might not use ever. So I used this like in a year, like once or twice. Yeah, so this, you here define whether you want to update your component or not. But if you're creating something small and quick, you don't really need to go that way, because this is for optimization. So the life cycle is as simple as this. This is what we're going to use from day to day and what you care about. So when you mount, you go.
Excuse me, I have put one example with the code sandbox for the life cycle to know that how we can render the design.
So you send it here.
The class. Up.
From next to
I did share with you. Yes, yeah, up.
okay.
This was I did share this one. Yeah.
This one?
No, up. I think. Yeah, this one.
And set them out.
And add branches you can do. Yeah. So all components are executing, and we can see here that how we execute. In the console, we can see that.
So if I open the console, I would see stuff.
Yeah. When the components mounted first,
So the
component will mount.
Then
the
that mount.
constructor then will mount and then will unmount.
Yeah, okay. Oh, that's
And when
useful.
we increment once, and the state changes, and then the component will receive props, and then again.
Okay. So this is a component lifecycle.
Yeah.
This is a class, and you are calling app.js, and this is using this one. So set new number. There should be a way to set this new number somewhere. So if we did component did mount, and let's just do this, and we set interval, and we update this dot set state of data. Or we could just call and just set interval, we just set new number.
Actually, it is already done in a component lifecycle component.
Really? I didn't see that.
All the components I have written a console statement.
Yeah, but it's not
see that
updating.
how we execute.
I want it to update automatically.
Yeah.
So in set interval we have a function, and it's not happy here because that's the function and found a null state to force update. Just update it myself. Just set state. So it's not working here.
Because set interval, no.
So I go to the function, and this function calls visits itself. Here it's not happy because. So what I want to see here is this thing updates automatically, and it was not updating automatically. That's why, like if I remove this and go back to the initial state, I wanted to see the life cycle happening. That's why I wanted to update it automatically.
Because if you go to the second component, the component down, yeah,
Okay.
this one, yeah, up, yeah. First, first there is a constructor that runs, execute, and then component will mount, and then the render, and then the component will mount. Is the sequence.
Yeah. Well, I want the sequence to repeat. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
It's
And
not
then-
repeating.
It's not repeating here.
You get the point?
It's not repeating here.
Well, I did not see it repeating.
It's happening only once, but you want that it will delete automatically.
I want us to see.
Okay, repeat it.
Like if the count something.
So,
Photo count.
I'm gonna revert everything. So I did not. This is the initial one. This thing is not happy.
I think it's repeating why we are getting the same errors in the console.
That is not defined in add.js.
He's saying it is a repeating, that's why it is keeping on.
It's not doing this.
Something is wrong.
Okay, so yeah, it would be a good example where something is wrong with it right now. We could make it work after the class. So it's even giving me an error here. So we have the constructor with the props and the state that sets data to 0 and setting props with the pine. And then data set data +1. And then we're rendering this, we're in the my number component life cycles. And here we'll mount, that mount, will receive props. Should update, will update, did update, will mount. Props with my number. So here it was saying DH. I think it's.
The app project.
I don't know what's wrong with this. It's doing stuff. It's throwing errors to stuff that's already wrote a while ago. Okay, so that's the idea. So what we mean is when we implement, so we'll receive props with the code, will update, did update, will unmount. So what happens here is you unmount a component after 10 seconds, which is really weird. Why would you do that?
Just want to show you
Okay.
that first the component will unmount, will mount, and then the render, and then the component will mount.
And then unmount. Okay,
And,
I got the point.
lastly will unmount.
Okay, I got the point. But I did not say that. I was like,
Yeah.
stuff was just disappearing. And,
Is it because
he unmounted the thing, like he wrote a code to unmount the component after 10 seconds to show that it's going to unmount. Okay, so let's go through this and let's go back to the example and play around with the component. So the first thing that happens to a new component is it goes through the constructor, runs the code in there, and here you initialize your state. You have your basic initialization. You bind your this function with a handler if you want, but this is old code, and then it goes directly to the render. There's stuff in the middle, but this is what actually you're going to use from day-to-day development. If you update the props, if you update the state, and if you click force update, which force update by default when component state of props change, your component will re-render. The method depends on other data. You could tell React the component needs re-rendering by calling force update. So if you're changing something and the thing is not rendering, you could just force update yourself without updating the state or anything. So this is a way to render again, even if nothing changed. So if you want to re-render, it happens after the thing runs in these three states. When you receive new props, when you update the state using set state, when you call force update by yourself. Then it's gonna call render and it's gonna execute your logic. Then after the render, React is gonna convert the JSX to HTML and JavaScript and whatever needed. It's gonna convert it to DOM. It's gonna check all the differences between what's gonna be generated from the render and what's actually in the DOM, and it's gonna implement the differences in the DOM with the most efficient way possible, with only the differences. It's not going to change the whole tree. It's going to only update the things that actually change. You guys know the virtual DOM thing, or?
Yeah.
So the virtual DOM is basically a JSON object inside React. Like you're not affecting this at all. Like this is happening internally in React. When you render something and you change something in your component, when you re-render, and the date changes from one date to another, when React renders this, it does not render the whole thing in the DOM. It only updates, compares between what's this going to change and what's actually in the DOM right now and what needs to be changed. So if you already rendered the element and you have the counter and you have everything, if the counter changed from 1 to 2, React is going to only change the p tag or the label from 1 to 2, or the text box. So it's actually very efficient when it's working with the DOM.
There is a difference between React and Angular, because Angular directly manipulate the DOM.
But that wasn't version 1. I think after version 1 it became a lot better. So they released the new version after React got popular and the performance.
All the things happening within the browser, not it is connecting to the server.
No, this is the rendering. React is the view layer. React receives data and renders it to the DOM. This is the whole purpose of React. The server, you use other libraries.
Yeah, but it's everything happening within the browser.
Yeah.
So first it takes all the data in the browser and then it compares.
So getting the data in the browser, that's an API call or an AJAX call. So you do this in other ways. Yeah, you could just call fetch, call an API, get the JSON data, and send this JSON object to React. And then React is gonna get this data and do the logic in JSX that you wrote to convert this data to HTML. And then React is gonna take care of the rest. But React does not fetch the data. You fetch it yourself, then send it down to the render function. So React is the view layer. It only focuses on the DOM and working with the JSX to convert it to something that the user can see. Getting the data and managing the global state, there are other libraries for that. And that's why React is way smaller than Angular. React only focuses on this. If you want to use routing, you use React Router or other libraries. So yeah, this only happens in the browser. React is working with the DOM elements in the browser with the elements and the components. So don't mix between the React ecosystem and React itself. React is a small library that only renders. It's a view library. Then you use other stuff with it that fetches from other services, fetches from the server, creates a React router for styling, and does other stuff. But this is the ecosystem, but React is only in the middle. It's not everything in it. Cool, so you changed here, and then the commit phase can work with DOM, run, side effects, schedule updates. So if you want to do anything that happens usually, or like multiple occurrence of the same thing, when the component dead mount, this is a callback that you can already work with the DOM. You can change this. The component is now in the DOM, and you can do something with it. It's already in there. It's in place. Component did update. It happens or gets called after any of these props. Any of these gets called after you have new properties, after you have the state changed, or after you call force update. This function gets called. And then the last thing, when you unmount the component from DOM, and this happens automatically in React, but still you could control it. When the component or the parent component gets removed from the DOM, and like this is the cleanup phase. So if you were caching stuff and the component will unmount, you could remove from the cache. If you were creating a set interval to update the value, you could remove the set interval and the component will unmount to release this from the browser process. So this is the cleanup phase. So you have the constructor, the render, these three update the render, and then component did mount, did update, and will unmount are the three that you're going to use mostly. And the component did mount is one of the things that you're going to use very often. Will unmount, you should use it. If you ignore it, it's not going to affect you. It's going to affect the performance of your app, or maybe create a memory leak if you have a really large app. With the rest of the stuff, I would say this should be a homework. So you should read more about this so we can have a lot more practice with this. So read more about the life cycle, but this is the basic stuff. So this is the understanding that's going to get you working with the app. And then if you have any questions, you could get back to me and answer that. And if you click in this link that I sent, I could send again. If you click in any one of them, you could go to the documentation and read more about it in the official documentation. And now we can go to the example that Rashid sent and see what's happening. So this app consists from two React components. The first one is an index, and it basically attaches app.js in the root element, which is just renders it. And it creates a timeout to unmount component at node at the root element. And this is a React function to remove the element that's attached in the root element. Basically removes the whole app from the DOM. We're gonna do it at 20 seconds so we can have time to work with it. So here we can increment and see what's happening. So when we increment, it increments the state, and I'm gonna send it down to another.
One thing. First, if you don't change the state,
Yeah.
then when the app runs,
Yeah.
the component will mount, and the component did mount, and then component will unmount, will run. But when we change the state, and it means the app state is updated, and then the component will receive props, and then we can see that all these things. The component will receive props.
Well,
and when
receive
component
props here has nothing to do with the state.
Yeah.
This is because we are sending the state down to another component. So cprops is actually called in this function, not from this. So here we updated the state,
Okay.
but it's not showing here because we're not saving anything in this main function. So let's understand what's happening there.
Yeah.
In app.js, we have app.js and we have component lifecycle. And inside app.js, it's basically what we did. We just initialized the state with data 0.
Yeah.
And then bind the function with this, which I think we could just remove, and just define this as an arrow function. It's going to work exactly the same, unless this is not ES6. Sorry, equal. So it's going to work exactly the same. This is just to make this work. So now it's a little bit simpler, and we can even do this without state. So it's a little bit simple. Okay, so we have state, we initialize it with data 0, and we have a function that updates the state to +1. So it's exactly the counter that we created, and this could be the onClick handler. And we have a button that calls this function at increments. Hey Eric, where's that? So this is exactly the counter app. We updated the state, and now whenever we click plus, the state gets updated with +1. So the only thing that's added here is we are sending this .state.data down as a property called myNumber to another component. So the state here in this component, we're sending it down to another component. So whenever the state changes here, the property that's sent to this component will change. So this is done, like we don't need to look at this again. This is another component now that we know that it takes myNumber as a property. So this is the life cycle that we're going to take a look at. The state is not going to change here. So the only thing that it's going to change is the props. So everything is going to get rendered. It's going to get rendered in this component. So it renders when component well mount, component dead mount. So well mount, it's will get mounted the first time in the DOM. Dead mount, this is when it's actually mounted in the DOM. Where receive props, whenever you're going to receive new props, you're going to receive this. And I think new props, do you receive the old props as well? I'm not sure about that. So console.log, new props, old props.
Oh, but yeah.
So no, you don't receive old props. Okay, so you receive only the old new props. So component will receive props. This is telling you that you're going to receive new properties, and this is the new properties you're going to receive. I think you will just access the current props with desktop props. So here you would know that console.log current props is desktop props and new props. So current props is myNumber 0, the new props is myNumber 1, because we incremented this. Incremented again. Current props is 1, new props is 2. So this is whenever the props get changed from the parent component and sent down, this gets called with the new properties that are going to be sent to me. Component should update. This sends to you the new props and new state, and you here can override the decision whether you want to update the component or not, whether you want to render or not. So what's the use of this component should update? The use is if you're seeing a lot of changes in your app, and if you have a big app that's using React, I'm not sure if this is using React or not, but you could go to the application. Chrome DevTools is one of the things you really, like, I think one of the courses in, I don't remember. One of the courses about Chrome DevTools, I think using debugging and using all the stuff you can do with Chrome DevTools would make your life just 10 times better in front-end development. So I think one of the things here we could use is the pane flash. So you could actually see what's happening in the browser, what's rendering. So you could profile JavaScript. You could see how long it's taking with every function. So this is rendering. So this tells you what's happening in the app. So when I scroll, it re-renders the scroll components. So any green box is re-rendered from the client itself. So when I click the checkbox, it rendered everything inside. When I render again, these are the things that gets updated. So this is actual operation that Chrome is updating inside your DOM. So if you did this and you're seeing just crazy number of updates in your app, then something is wrong. The performance is just gonna decrease like exponentially. So you need to know why is everything updating. Then you could write functions in your React components and say, okay, in this state it's updating because this and this happening. Okay, I need to cut this. I need you to only update when this logic happens. So you write your logic here and you prevent your components from re-rendering unless you want them to re-render. So extreme cases when your app is very slow, and this is one of the things you should care about is the frame per second, the FPS. If your browser is not rendering at the 30 or 60 frame per second, I think it's 60 in the browser, then your app is actually slow. It's taking a lot of time to render, and that's one of the things why React became so popular after Angular, because Angular was taking so long to render these apps, and the frame per rate when you do a lot of scrolling, you have a lot of DOM elements, it actually gets really slow, and you can feel it as a user. So this is one of the things in React that makes your app faster when it's really slow, but definitely not one of the things that's going to affect you in the beginning. So this is component should update. Component will update. This is notifying you that the component will update. So again, you could use it for debugging if you want. And Rashid just told me that it's going to be removed in React 16.3.
Yeah, 16.3.
Yeah, I did not know that. Component did update. You're going to still use this. I think this is when the component is actually updated. You could console log here and see why is this component getting updated right now and what's happening for it to be updated. Component will unmount. This is when the component will be removed from DOM. So here you clean up your component. If you were using a set interval, you remove your set interval here. If you were using any kind of streaming, you stop it here. So this is where the component is going to get removed. You clean up after yourself. And let's do the example one last time. So component will mount, component did mount, and then I'm going to increment. It will receive new props, did update because it already received new props. So will receive new props, will update because it already.
If we put return false,
it's not going to
then we
update.
can check. Yeah.
So if you do this and clean this, so component will receive props. And it did receive them. It went here, but we returned false. So false here, I could do some logic and say, let's see, so console.log new props, increment. So the new props is my number 1. So I could say if new props dot new number, my number is less than 10, then return false, otherwise return true. So as long as this number is less than 10, do not do anything. So component will mount, did mount. So I'm gonna where receive props, not doing anything. Where receive props, then will update, did update. So this is where you control whether it should continue the execution or not.
Yeah.
But again, the usages of it is performance. So by default it returns true. I think by default it compares between the properties and the current properties and the current state. And if there's any change between the objects, it's going to render. If there is any, it's not going to render. But you can override this behavior. So yeah, is anything not clear?
So the component update is kind of set a condition when the component will be updated. It's like conditions, like what you do.
So this in should component update?
Yeah.
In should component update, yeah, that you can override the logic in React that says whether this component should re-render or not.
So basically, you just put a lot of logic inside to make a decision.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So if it's returned true, then this component will implement.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you can control it whether you want to force it to update or not. So it's your decision. And this what goes back to whatever you want.
Well, we're going to use component will update.
Let's use it. Will update, I think. So component will update React 16. So let's see when it exactly was removed.
That's true.
So what?
I don't know if the name has it.
So unsafe. So they say it's unsafe and it's going to be removed in the latest version. So you should just use component did update.
Okay.
So will update, then did update. So
Yeah.
just use did update.
Mm.
So it's will mount or is it will receive props or I don't know. So like if you ever
Only will mount will be there.
will
The
mount.
next one's brain, yeah.
Okay.
And the will receive props, will update will be deprecated.
Okay. So if you ever in
I
doubt,
have,
just
I have seen one documentation online.
And I'm so sorry, can I go?
yeah, sure.
So one question I have.
So I will just continue. So can you please play around with this stuff and
Yeah, sure.
maybe I'll send you some examples. So if Isaac, for example, if you didn't finish the current examples, I could send them to you so you can do it at home and read a little bit about the life cycle and style components.
Okay.
And just know the basics, and next time we're going to use style components and use the life cycle and data.
Okay, yes.
So if you're ever in doubt, just check this link, and that's going to
Yes.
redirect you to the documentation.
There is also one picture that I have sent to the group. It is a detail, and if they want to.
Well, if it's too detailed, it might be confusing. So
Yeah,
actually,
it's right.
the smaller it is, like this is what you need to work with.
Best one.
Cool. See ya. Have a nice week.
And this is the best one. I have seen. I have also. I saw this one. This is the best one.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, you could know a lot of stuff, but you just need to know the basics that you're going to work with. So the only constructor, render, and these that are actually usable, and even with component weld mount, you don't use it that much.
Yeah.
So if you take a look at it, it's only constructor and render, and then dead mount and dead update. And dead mount is like the most one's going to be used after render. Like in most usages, that's what I mean.
I had a problem when I was working on the portfolio because when I call Ajax call, I put an API call
Yeah.
to fetch the JSON data.
Yeah.
And because first time when a component render, it renders first time and then the second time again render. So I had a problem because I got empty object.
Yeah.
I could not get the data from that.
Yeah.
I think this is the most important thing everybody should know. That
Yeah.
what's the difference between component will mount and the component did mount.
Yeah.
Because it happens when we fetch data and the whole app, the component executes first and it gets rendered, and until it gets rendered, we cannot get the data from
You have an empty object, yeah.
That's why we have empty object, because I had this problem, so I sort of.
That's actually a really good thing to mention. So one of the things we're gonna pass through is conditional rendering. So you'd actually render the part of the element, part of the DOM, or part of the component when you have the data. So you wait for it. You wait for this object to be filled before you render. So you have a defensive code.
Yeah.
If I have this, then I render. If I don't, then I wait until it gets updated. So yeah, definitely there are ways to get around this and just wait for the data to be fetched from the server.
That's why I put a logic that I put a state null first, and then when it gets rendered, then
You actually render it.
yeah, I do.
That's really good. We're gonna go through the whole documentation of React. So let's go back to the state and lifecycle. So you guys now know about the basics of lifecycle. Does not get us more complex than that with the lifecycle. Just have a render and component that mount to do any side effects. So going back, we're gonna do the same example we saw here with the date and just update the date in another component. So this creates a date and sends to another component. So you guys follow what's happening here? We actually did half of this already. So this is a clock example, and we are setting the state with a default value, and we're rendering it from the state. Then in the constructor here, we just update the state, and now we're attaching the clock, the whole element in the DOM. That's exactly what we did in the app. Then here we have the constructor, we have the render. This is the whole example. So this maps to using the clock and creating the app, but we just move the state one level up and we send the value to the clock one level down. We want to use more lifecycle methods. We want to create a timer. That's exactly what we did as well. So we have the state and it gets updated here. We want to set interval. So this to timer ID, they name the timer in this to timer ID. They just saved it in the object.
Is component date mount means that once you render, then you're going to implement this set interval.
So you wanna create something in the component when it's actually there, when it's in the DOM. So component dead mount is a function or a hook in the component that means this component is actually mounted in the DOM now. So you can
at
access.
the same time as you render your DOM.
I think this happens before the render.
Oh, okay.
After the render.
After?
After the render.
I don't
Because
have
before the
to
render.
make
First constructor, then component will mount, then render, and then component will mount. Because I was memorizing myself that how it executes.
In React 15 it was before. I think they might have changed in the React 16. So the trigger here, component did mount not triggered when using inherit, no. Okay, the last thing I remember is that it gets called before the render. Maybe it's changed in React 16. I haven't worked with React 16 yet. But in our case, we could read more about this. It really affects a lot. But for now, our usage will be, so let's see here. The life cycle, dead mount, component, dead mount. They have hook runs after the component output has been rendered to the DOM. So you're actually correct. It's changed in the latest version, which you're correct. So this is gonna get called when you have thing rendered in the DOM already.
And that's why we have a problem for the edges call. If you put edges call into the component will mount, it gets rendered first.
Ah, okay.
That's why. Because we want to wait for the complete rendering process. Then we have to call the edges. Then we can get the object.
So
Because I have this problem.
you render first, then you call the Ajax, so then it will.
Because I was, I want to remember myself that how the component lifecycle will execute. So I was, I want to memorize. So I think that what I got that how it rendered. First, the constructor to initialize the state, and then component will mount, and then the render, and then component will mount. So there is a process. If we use
So
the
in this
component,
order.
yeah, this is
So constructor, then render, then component, then mount.
did mount.
So what is useful for component will mount?
Well, mount.
Will mount if we don't use that because
So you don't have to think about it because it's going to be removed. So
Yeah.
Oh,
The
it's gonna be removed. Oh, good.
did mount, it gets called when the thing is actually rendered in the DOM.
Is it as the use of promises? Can we say like that?
You can create a promise component did mount and wait for the value to get back in. So if you want to do any side effects when the thing is actually in the DOM, you can do it in component did mount.
So it's side effects.
if
Yeah,
you use
it's-
the
it's a-
library Axios or fetch, that library uses promises.
So did mount will wait until you get all the data. And
Did
then-
mount, yeah.
No. There's no data about React.
Yeah.
Data, like React does not work with fetching. But if you want to fetch something, you want to fetch it after the component gets. Well, actually,
Rendered.
before that, we were doing it in component well map. But in this case, it's not going to matter at all. Like it's confusing, but you should write your code always in a defensive way. You should not depend that the property is going to be there 100%. So if you're going to fetch something from an API, it could take a second to 5 seconds if it's a very slow API. So you should always depend that's not going to be there and run your code with or without this data. So let's do something like this. So component did mount here, like at this stage, when this function gets called from React, you have the thing already in the DOM. So what if this .set state to date is not there? What if this is not set? We're setting as an object, and this. So let's do this as 3 seconds. Let's go back here. So for the first 3 seconds of the app, it did not render anything. But if I was using an object, like if this is not a date, if it's like my obj that contains a date with a new date, the two local string. So if this is the shape of the thing that I was requesting, and here I was accessing state.myObj.date, it's going to break. Because my object does not exist. You cannot access date of undefined. So you need to have a defensive code that actually checks in the clock whether, this dot my, no, I was accessing, no, it's correct. So I sent this in the app.js, and here my option is not there yet. So usually you would write code that checks if this dot state dot my option, then I would render this. Otherwise, I will not do anything. So I wrote a defensive code that it's not going to render the component unless I get my object, but I'm not going to get it because this should set my option date. So here I'm setting the state with the new structure, and this is not going to render unless my option.
What's this and?
Oh, sorry. And is a Boolean condition that is going to run the next one if the first one succeeds. So the first one is a Boolean, and the second one is JSX. So if the first one is true, then render to the JSX. If it's false, don't render the JSX. So now it's going to render every 3 seconds. So what I mean here is when you read something from the props or the state, or you get something from an API, you always check whether the data is there yet or not before you render. And then you don't have to care whether you do it in the well mount or dead mount. This is going to run no matter what. If the data is not there, I'm not going to render. If it's there, I'm going to render. So what is this? What we did here is called conditional rendering. So if we go back to the, like this is 2 steps after the life cycle. So we move 2 steps ahead. So we're going to finish the life cycle and go down to the conditional rendering. So what I'm doing now is going through all the React basics one step at a time and doing all the examples. So if you ever feel lost, go through the quick starting again, and you can see the examples one by one. So here in component did mount, they created a timer and set interval, and they give it a name with a timer ID. So in the clock, I'm gonna change the stuff that I did with the date. So I'm gonna change this. I'm gonna remove this thing. Then I'm gonna use this to date. If I have a date, I would render it, and then I would update the date directly. And then set this interval, I would just test that timer ID. And the usage of this, getting the set interval function and a timer ID, is that when we unmount, I would, well, unmount. I would release this clear interval with the interval ID. So clear interval is like set interval, but removes remove the execution from the browser. So I would just give it this with timer ID to clear this interval and stop it from keeping running in the browser in the background. Cool. So we now work with unmount. So now the component will be unmounted. I will remove the interval from the component. And we have the tick. Our tick here is a function that updates the state. We already have this. And we are rendering this in the DOM. So this is most of it. So using state. One of the things that were confusing us today is how to use state. So this is how to use state correctly. If you want to update the state, you use set state. You cannot update state like this. You have to use system.set state with an object and the key and the value you want to update it with. State updates may be asynchronous. So you could have multiple set updates in the same time. In a single update for performance, combine them. Okay, so React does this internally. So you could just keep setting updates from an AJAX response. So you made an AJAX call and the response came back to you. This is running asynchronously. You could run set update, this set state method in this asynchronous function. So it doesn't have to run in synchronous code. So as a second form, let's say accept the function rather than the object. You could actually create a function in this set state instead of an object. And this function will receive the previous properties and the new properties, previous state and the properties, and it would return again an object with the new state. So instead of just writing an object directly, you could create a function that returns the new object, which is an advanced execution. We use the arrow function above to access the state, but again, if you don't want to use it, you could create a function that receives the previous state and the props, but I would not recommend that. The other one is way easier. State updates are merged. When you update something in the state, you don't have to update everything. So if you have 3 properties, you want to update only one of them, you only update the thing that you want to update, and React is going to merge this update to the global state. So you don't have to just keep updating the whole object as you just update the specific key you want to update, or multiple keys, and then React is going to merge it with the whole thing. So you don't have to worry about the others, they're not going to get removed. So if you have posts and comments, you could only update the posts and be sure that the comments are going to stay the same in this update. It's not going to get removed. So you could update them separately. The data flows down. This is also a thing we discussed. When you have props, you send it down. You do not access anything that goes like one level up. So neither parent nor child components can know if a certain component is stateful or stateless. You send the properties down, and then it's over. It's the other components' problem to just work with them. You should not care whether it's a function or a class. When you deal with a React component, you just need to know what properties to send, and you send it down, and that's it. So when you think, you only think about this component, what I needed in this component I work with. You finish it, then you move to the other one, and you send the properties to it. Component may choose to pass its state down as props. So you always send properties to child components as static strings or objects, but you could use to send part of your state to another component as properties. So you already worked with this as well. Cool. So again, another thing we discussed, all components are isolated. So if you have multiple clocks, and we did this, every clock will have its own internal state, and it's not going to affect the other. So every component is, when you run it, you run an instance of it with its own state and with its own everything. So, and they never collide if the state is included in it. So each clock sets its own timer and updates independently. It just runs independently from the others. So this is the state and life cycle. Do you have any questions about props, states, or life cycle? Anything is confusing?
I think would it be good practice if we use the presentational component or the stateless component if we want to put to pass the props, because they don't have their own state, because we don't have to write the class for that one, because in that example we put the class keyword with both components.
So you say that we can use the props in either case.
Because this app component has a state. This
So-
component doesn't have a state, because we can use
We definitely can.
stateless component.
We definitely can. That's
As a
actually be.
constant,
You can definitely do that. That'll be a better approach. Cool. We are actually ahead of this. I'm going to go through this very quickly. This is the event handler, how to handle events from HTML elements. And we already know how to do this. We have the onClick. This is the one in HTML. In React, you just send the function that you want to execute, the function name, in the onClick. And remember that you have the camel case. So you start with a small letter and then continue with capital letters. No, it's camel? It's camel, yeah. We already used this. You cannot do, so this in HTML, I think it's not going to be usable in React. So you have to have a function in JavaScript that gets executed. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this code. We already did this. So this function is a function that takes E as an event from the DOM, and then you can use it. But in our case, we're not using it, so we're not doing anything with it. And then we update the state as a toggle or plus and minus. So we could work with this. We could do this example quickly. Create a toggle on and off. So here we're just gonna name this toggle.js. Gonna import React component from React, and then we're gonna create a class toggle extends component, and then the render we're gonna return dev, and this dev should have state is dash state. Let's say this toggle is, and then we should render something here. So we're gonna start with a constructor, and in the constructor we're gonna define the state. Actually, we don't need the constructor. We're just gonna set the state with the toggle. It's gonna be true, meaning it's gonna be on initially, and then the toggle, if toggle, then I'm gonna type on, otherwise I'm gonna type off. So, and then I need to export this. Cool. And then I'm gonna import this in app.js. And toggle import toggle from the slash toggle, and it's not defined. So this should be this state to toggle. So toggle is on. If I change this to false, it reads from it. It's going to be off. So this reads from the toggle. Now I want to create a button with an on click with this dot toggle handler. I'm going to create this function now. Toggle and end the button, and then I'm going to create another function. It's called toggle handler equals. It's going to be a function that updates the state and sets the toggle to this state of toggle, like the false version of the toggle. So if it's true, I'm going to be false. If it's false, it's going to be true. And this state is going to update here. It's going to go back to the toggle. It's going to re-render. So whenever I click toggle, the toggle function goes to this toggle handler, and then if the state is true, I will negate it. Negate the value. So the new toggle value will be reversed or negated. So, and then it's going to affect it here. And then I can see if it's true, it's going to be on, otherwise off. And I think, so you can see it's working. So let's go back to the example. Cool. So these are the functions. Quickly, we have the events handler. We can do this. And the last thing is we can send properties. So when we have a function like this, this is the event that's being sent from the browser, so we can receive E for event. If this is an input, we can get the value of the input using E the targeted value. But this is not a text box. And I think we did this another time, so I'm going to ignore it for now. Cool. Let's go to the conditional rendering, which is the thing Rashid talked about. Now, what if I want to only render a part of the component based on a variable or state or property variable? So you can distinct components that encapsulate behavior you need, then you can render only some of them depending on the state of the application. So if I toggle something, I want to show part of the component but the other not, or switch in the component. So I want to only render part of it. So I have a conditional operator in React, works the same way in JavaScript. Cool. So we have these two. So you want to write something in greetings. So in the return function, so here instead of doing this, I could do return two things. So now I know that this state toggle might be true or false. So I could write an if condition, and if it's true, I would return that, and then toggle is true, or toggle is on. But then I would have to render the button. So I could render the button outside, render button. Ignore this for now. So we could render the button, then render this. So this is going to render this. Then we'll render button. And this is for the first condition. Otherwise, I would just render something else. And this could be more complex than that, just a very basic, stupid example. So toggle is off, and then I would render the same button. So toggle is off, and here I can see that I'm returning something else. So based on a variable, I could return whatever I want instead of returning internally. Could return with a function. This is the first way. The second way is to do it internally. So if you're logged in, we show you a login button. If you're logged out, I show you a logged in. I show you a log out button. If you are logged in, I show you logged out. I show you a login button. So, and then show you a greeting. Cool. Let's do this example.
But I think the inline one is not very recommended.
If you're doing something very small, the inline one is good. But if the logic is complex and you have a lot of conditions, then doing everything in line will make it more complex. And generally, components should be very simple. So yeah, if it's a big condition, then it's totally not recommended. So let's do this greeting example. So it's going like login control. Login control with JS. That's getting boring. So here we wanna render login control. So we want to render two buttons based on the login state. So initially I'm going to be logged out. So my state logged in will be false. And here I want to render something if I'm logged out. So if what I'm going to do is this state of logged in. If I'm logged in, I will print logged in just as a starter. Otherwise, I'm going to be logged out. And then here, import login control from /login control. So I'm logged out now. So what I need to do is, whenever this changes, I need to have a button here to say I'm logged in. So what they did is they created, move this to the end. Oh, not that. Conditional rendering. They're going to create two smaller components. So this is user greeting. Let's go for that first. If you're logged in, it's going to show your name or show just a quick greeting. So just create it here. So class greeting, or you could create it using const greeting equals def greeting user, and I have to return this. So if you're logged in, I'm going to show this greeting. If you're logged out, I'm going to show you a logged out element. And then we're going to create a login button, which is going to be a login function and a logout. So login and logout. And then the onClicks are going to be in the main function. So now I need const button or login button, and without the state, it's going to return a button with an onClick, but the onClick here, I will receive it from the parent component. So
This dot props
this dot props dot
anything.
click handler.
You can pass your parameters in the Python.
Sorry, say again.
You can pass your parameters from there. So like curly brace and onClick.
Ah, props. Yeah, could do this as well. And it's just type click handler. So this could be a login button. I could type login here, but I could even make it more customizable. So I could create a login button, a logout button, or I could just call this button, and I could receive a text and a click handler, or click handler and text, and I will type the text here. So this button is generic. It has a text and it has a handler. Could write anything in it. Could even receive styling. And then I'm gonna use this button here, and then I'm gonna send text to the login, and the click handler will be login handler. I'm gonna use this later. So, and then another button with text logout, and the click handler will be logout handler. And then I'm gonna write, so we should see the output now. Login handler is not defined, so let's do them. Login handler is a function, and here I'm gonna update this .state logged in equals. Okay, now my mind is just flying out. This is set state logged in should be true, and the logout handler is another function that logs the user out. Set state logged out logged in is false. So, and these should be this dot login handler, and this should be this dot logout handler. They should render now. We have login.
It's capital. Button. Now the
Oh yeah, sorry. Button. So now we have two buttons, login and logout, and they are the same button. When you click on them, they call this function that's sent to them. One of them is logs you in, one of them logs you out. So we could just keep it there, add a PR. So what else? So now we have a component for the greeting, And
handler. Where is the click I? Yeah.
yeah, now I want to show you a greeting only if you're logged in. So here, if this dot state dot logged in, and I will show you a greeting. I will only render this greeting component only if you're logged in. So we have the greeting here, we're using the component. So now we're logged out, I'm gonna log you in. This is gonna only run when logged in is true. I log out again, it's gonna be removed again. I wanna know,
We can use this logic with showing components and hiding components.
yeah, exactly. So if you have, like show, if you have a toggle, and this toggle is show this or hide this, you could always show and hide components based on whether something exists or
more than
not.
one component.
Or it could be if you are calling an API and this you're saving the result in the state and you want to only show the list of items when the items are returned from the server, then it could be this that state that items returned from the server is true, then go here and send like logged in as a property.
Can we next class fetch something from API?
We actually did this in the first class, we could do it again,
but,
for sure.
Can we do
Yeah.
something more complex, but not now?
Next class.
You guys have tried out?
For me, I have to be
Okay, cool.
because
Okay, cool. Well, for this, there's a very, very quick option that you can run an API call. So how about you guys try to take a look at it for like half an hour using JSON server. It's a tool, just search online for JSON server, I sent you the first class, and you make the API call in component 12 mount, or component dead mount, and you just call using fetch. It's really quick, and I could send you the code in the middle of the week, so we could do it again, like just move faster with it. So how about we do it like before Tuesday? If you didn't like, if you don't make it before Tuesday, I would send you the homework so you could create your own API call and save stuff in the server. Too much?
I can't understand.
Well, yeah, it sounds like too much. Okay, let's just do it next time. Cool. So,
I'm leaving.
cool. Well, have a nice day.
Inshallah.
Yeah, so, cool. So this is conditional rendering. We're gonna continue with the list again. So here we are rendering the login. Okay, so there's another way to do this. So
if we can use one button to do the same stuff.
we can do this. So the first, actually the example was to show and hide the button, like which button based on the login state. So if this is logged in, so they did it another way. If you're logged in, I'm going to show you the login. If you are logged out, the logged out login is false. And I'm going to show you this, but they did it actually in a simpler way. Just going to confirm that this is working. So log out. If you're logged in, I'll show you this. If you're not logged in, logged in, I'll show you the logout. If you're not logged in, show you the logout. It should work. Okay, but this is a little bit more complex, so we have an easier way to do this. Is before the render, you get your button. So const button equals, and then you would do it by just making the logic outside. So this dot state dot logged in. If you're logged in, then I would return to you the login button, or the logout button. So you could do this as well. Otherwise, I would return to you the login button. and then I would just render the button. So here I save the JSX object in a variable, and then I used it. And that's exactly what they did here. So if you're logged in, you have a ternary, I don't know the name, the expression.
Ternary operator.
Yeah, it's like a ternary operation. Then if this is true, this is the thing is gonna be executed or returned. Otherwise, it's gonna return this. So your button, if you're logged in, I show you the log out button. Otherwise, I'm gonna show you the login button, and then you render this button here. So you have different ways now to show stuff, show different elements in JSX using this or running it internally this way, or moving the whole logic to a different function. So we could have a function to render button, and this render button, I'll just use it to render the button here to even make it a little bit easier. So this to render button. So I move the logic to a function, but here I'm going to execute it, and in the render function I'm going to check if this state.logged in return the logged in button, sorry, the logged out button, then else return the login button. So you could write complete JavaScript syntax if you want. So this function will return JSX in one of the trees, and based on this, it returns different conditions. And here you have different. Let's just expand it to look really better. Is this does this make sense?
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool, great.
It make more sense if we write that down.
Make more sense.
Well, I want to move fast with this stuff. I wanted you to do everything yourself, but I think we were wasting more time. So I think if you take a look at the stuff and then try it home yourself, then come back and fix it again.
That's a good strategy, because we can cover the more things and learn many more things.
So I moved really fast the first class, thinking that you would just try it home by yourself, but you guys were a little bit behind. So if you exercise at home, you could just finish React in 2 settings, but you just need to practice all this stuff. And you have this great React tutorial, and like they made React, and this is the way you can read it. So just going through the basics of it, this is enough to start stuff, and then you can continue by yourself whenever you want and go through this more advanced stuff. But you definitely don't have to understand everything in it, and if you don't, you just ask for help. So we now, I think, like for the first class, we finished more than half the stuff that's in the quick start. So if we finish it next time, maybe we can go into the advanced stuff and discuss Redux and discuss advanced styling. But if you're
complex,
you just need to practice. That's all. If you ever in doubt, just go back and exercise each one of them independently. So you have the hello world, it's that simple, and you definitely understand this. Then you want to know about JSX, you already know JSX, but you just keep practicing. So take each one of them and write it down, render it, and see what's happening.
Yeah, basically, I think it's a look like a JavaScript, and in a Redux we make the components, and we need to handle these components and render on our page or on our app.
Yeah, so it actually makes your components smaller. It writes the logic in a simpler syntax. If you would write this in jQuery or other apps, you would write a lot more code to make the same, create the same output.
Already we a lot know about the JavaScript and the logics and make the things, but in this module we have to reassemble the things, and there is a new sentence also.
Yeah, you just need to practice. So, so far, do you guys have any questions? So we discussed this and operator. So inline if logical. So everything we use this method as well. If else, we use this.
Yeah.
We saw this as well. Prevent the component from rendering. So here, in rare cases, you might want a component to hide itself even though it was rendered by another component. To do this, return null. So if you don't want to render the whole thing at all, you just return null in the render. If you want to do this. So this is a component that renders a warning. If you did not send me the warning at all, I would just return null instead. So returning null means this component is not going to render at all. Meaning that I'm breaking, or you should console log or throw an error. But if you return null in the render or in the component, it's completely not going to render. It's not going to break as well. I think we could stop at this stage for today, or can you take a look at lists?
We stop there.
So actually, yeah. Actually, we did lists and keys as well. You guys, all of you, did lists and keys. So you had this JSON object and the like your scales. You moved it to a JSON object and you rendered it. So we're gonna go through it quickly. So next time we can go to forms and more advanced stuff. But this is not new. We already did this. So what if I want to render a list in React? Very simple. You map over this array, and for each one of them, you return the item that you want to render for this element. So if I want to render a list like from 1 to 5, I have 1 to 5, then I map and I return an li for each element. Let's do this very, very quickly. So we don't have time to run this, so I'm just going to rename this to list. And here list, and then I know let's create a const numbers, which is an array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then here this is going to be a UL, and then here inside this I would say this dot numbers dot map exactly. And then for each item, for each num, I would just return this directly with the square brackets, the normal brackets, an li. Then I would just render the num here. Then in add.js, just render this. So it's a list. Few things we need to know. There's something called key. So when you render a list and you want to make React faster, so you can move it to another component and then using the props you render another component, but you already know how to do this.
Yeah.
Then you have something called key, and key is something in React list components that differentiates or helps React differentiate between each item of these. So when you have a list like this, and React is going to update on one of the elements, if they look exactly the same, React comparison is not going to be as fast if it cannot identify which element is this in the list. So to make this performant, we add the key property to a list item, only to the list, and just add any unique variable. Here it's numbers, so we're going to say that the key of each one of these elements is the number itself. So if you're adding a list of users, then the key will be the ID of the user. So we just find something unique in each item and do it. And this is not going to affect the rendering. Like it's going to render exactly the same. Just makes it more performant. So you don't need to include it, but it's definitely a recommended option. Yeah, the performance is going to decrease if you don't use it. So keys help React identify which items have changed or added or removed. So using these, React can compare and know what has been added or changed or removed. And then it makes the re-rendering a lot better. So if we have a list of to-dos, then the key will be the to-do ID. and then the text, just add this thing to the list.
If you include the .id, does it?
If you have an ID, then use it. But in our case, we did not have an ID. So here, each to-do was an object, and this object contained the ID and the text and other stuff. So they used the ID as the key because they don't have a number. But in our case, the number was a unique number itself. So using it, like if you have anything unique in it, you could just use whatever you want.
Because I was looking when I was doing routers. I saw an example where they were passing match, then somewhere they put .id. So I couldn't.
Match with ID.
Yeah, they put match.id. Maybe I can find it and I'll show you here.
Well, let's take a look at it after the class. So if you have only one LI, you don't have to specify it. You only have it when you have a big list. So there's no need to specify the key here. So they only make sense when you have an array, when you have a list, not only one item. So the correct usage is when you have a list item that's being used in an actual list, in like the main list. Key must be unique among siblings. Again, if you're using ID, it's ID. If you're using a number, it's number. It just has to be unique. And yeah. Embedding map in JSX. We all know this stuff as well. We used this as well, so yeah, I think we're good. So we already used the stuff from the first class, and we used it yesterday. We used it again today. So please
And you also get error in the browser, the console that if you don't put key.
It's
There is
warning.
no error, not error warning.
It's warning. Yeah, because again, React uses this virtual DOM to compare. So if it cannot compare, like if you had 5 elements, then you removed 3 and added another 8. It would not know what exactly was removed and what was. So you have just a bunch of lists and with a bunch of text, and then some was removed and some was added and some was just rearranged. When it wants to compare between them, how would it know which elements are exactly the same and which not? So you add this key, so it would know, okay, this key is gone, then it was removed, then I would remove it from the DOM. Or this key was added, it's new, and I would add it to the DOM. This key was updated, then I would update it in the DOM.
Especially when we want to have a product version. We